So, thank you all for attending this webinar this morning. The next hour, hopefully you will receive lots of advice and guidance and practical tips that you can put into practice to help with your job search. It's going to be an informative session, but we'd also like it to be a really interactive session. So what you can expect over the next hour, there'll be a few polls where we'll have a chance to gauge opinion and you can let us know your thoughts on certain topics. There's also going to be a chance for questions and answers. So if you look to the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. So at any point during the webinar, if you've got a question, if I can just ask you to pop it into that box there, and then we will try and answer as many of those as possible as we go through, if they're not already going to be covered during the things we're talking about. So I'll keep an eye on the Q&A box, as I said, as we go, but if it's relevant, I'll pop them in as we go along. Otherwise, we'll catch up and have some time for questions at the end of the session. But firstly, let's introduce ourselves so you know who we all are who are talking to you today. I'll go first. I'm Kelly. I think I know some of you on the call, but for those that don't know me, I'm one of the two directors of Lawrence Dean Recruitment, along with Sarah. I've worked in the recruitment industry for 20 years now, so hopefully I've got some practical experience to draw on to tell you about. However, my main role for today, I'm pleased to say, is actually to be throwing your questions to the other three ladies on this call. So without further ado, let's get you guys to introduce yourselves. So Sarah, if I can come to you first, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sarah. I run Lawrence Dean Recruitment with Kelly. I have just under 20 years experience of finding people jobs. So in terms of, I suppose, what I want to share today, over that 20 years, I've worked through a recession, so very similar to what we're in at the moment. And I've helped lots of people find jobs that ultimately I don't think would have done before without help on how to make their sort of skills experience stand out. I've looked at countless CVs over that 20-year period, and I've worked on countless roles. So I'd like to share my insights in terms of what companies look for and equally how candidates can help themselves stand out and get noticed, which is obviously really, really important at the moment. So that's me.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just had the first question in the Q&A box that I feel like I need to address quickly before we do the rest of our introductions. The kind of very observant ones amongst you might have noticed, we're not both called Sarah Leet. If your Zoom box... That's to do with the Zoom licensing and how it recognises us, because we're obviously both on the Lawrence Dean Zoom account. So yeah, well done. Prize to the first person who spotted that. I'm Kelly Notley. Sarah was who.
I'm actually Sarah Lee. Yeah.
Not much your name. Okay, thank you for that. Charlotte, if I can come to you next.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Charlotte. My latest role has been head of HR at Affinity for Business. I've worked in HR for over 20 years and recruitment has always been part of that role. So I have consistently supported line managers to spec out a role, define a role, understand what they need for their team, and then fill the role accordingly. So I have met with hundreds of people who are looking for a role. It's a lovely part of the role in HR because you get to meet lots of interesting people. And I think I probably have read thousands of CVs now in my time. If not hundreds, it's thousands. And I'm also a qualified coach, so I'm also very into people development and people reaching their full potential. And hopefully their career is one way that they obviously do that.
Brilliant, thank you, Charlotte. And then last but not least, Carol, if we can come to you.
Hi there, I'm Carol Jager and I work at PayPoint based in Welwyn Garden City in an in-house recruitment role. So helping different business areas recruit people from our call centre right up to some of our senior roles within the company. So again, speaking to lots of different candidates and helping them with a variety of different roles, as well as helping in-house and internal people at PayPoint move into different jobs. So yeah. Speaking to lots of people every day and again looking at lots and lots of CVs.
Brilliant. Okay, so it's safe to say CVs, job applications, people are all things that we're passionate about. So hopefully we can make some difference to people today and offer some help and guidance. Someone has just asked in the question box, apologies if I didn't say this up front, but the webinar should last for an hour today. So we're aiming to be done for around about 12:30. So that's the kind of timing we're looking at. Okay, we've got loads to cover, so let's go straight into it. Now, the strange thing about a webinar is my screen tells me there's lots of people watching, but I can't see any of them. So to check that you're all there and awake, I'd like us to start with our first poll, if I can, please. So we'll pop that poll. You should be seeing that come up on your screens now. So given the current climate, we're keen to find out, how often do you actually receive a response after you have applied for a job online? So if I can just ask you to click the most appropriate option from there. You can only click one. Don't overthink it. Just go with the option that is you feel is most appropriate to your experiences. Those of you who are applying for lots of jobs online, we'll give it a minute or so for you all to respond. But yeah, how often do you actually receive a response? It could be an automated response, a response in person, a phone call, an email, whatever that might be, but just some form of response as opposed to nothing at all. Once we've had a significant number of replies, I think the majority of you have now responded. We should be able to get the results up. There we go. So hopefully you can all see that. I'm actually pleasantly surprised that the never is pretty small. Apologies to those of you that applies to. But as you can see, occasionally and sometimes are pretty much leading the field. And I think that's not necessarily a huge surprise at the moment, given the fact that there are sadly more people out of work than we would normally expect. That also links into a much higher volume of applications for every job that's being advertised. As a recruiter, I can see both sides of that coin. I can sympathise with employers who, even the most moral and ethical amongst us are battling to respond to a much higher volume of applications than normal. However, no doubt whatsoever that as a job seeker to not receive any response at all must be frustrating, demotivating. Hence the reason for this webinar this morning. So it leads us quite nicely into talking about CVs. The first part of most job applications is to submit a CV. And that's the best way to get your application noticed and therefore hopefully increase the amount of times you get a response. So if we can start by talking about CVs. So if I can come to you first, Charlotte, to open this one, because as you said, CVs are really a specialist subject of yours. In your experience, what do you think makes a great CV?
I've thought about what's the most important part of a CV to me, and I've realised that it's actually the formatting becomes the most important part of the CV, and I've wondered why, because obviously that's just part of the CV, and the candidate obviously really wants you to read the CV and understand a bit about them and their values and their work experience and their skills. But for me, being a bit of a stickler, I guess the formatting is so important because it's your first impression of the CV. So the CV is the candidate's first impression to the company. And then when that actually comes through either on LinkedIn or an email, to look at the formatting of it and how organised and structured and accurate and well laid out that's a first impression. So it's like the CV walking in the door. When the person walks in a room for an interview, it's the first impression. So I think the formatting of the CV is more important than people might realise. And then once that is there, I would go straight to the personal profile, and that needs to really explain what makes that person different, what they're passionate about, if they're really passionate about customer service, or if they have extensive organisational skills, or whatever it is. That's really what I want to see. What is their passion really? What is it that, for me, it's relationship building.
Yeah.
So I make sure that's on my personal profile, even though there's other stuff that I do. For me, that's what makes it a good day at work, the ability to do that. So if someone has got a passion for customer service and that's what makes it a good day at work, then that's what they should put on their personal profile. And then I think really for me, to not have any gaps as well, to make sure it's a full comprehensive CV. And if there's a gap in time for travel or caring responsibilities, it has to be comprehensive, it has to be on there, so there aren't any question marks as to, I wonder what that person was doing 4 years ago, or why is there 6 months here and 9 months there. And I think employers are okay, obviously, with gaps in the CV in terms of employment history, as long as it's expressed what that person has been doing in that time, and therefore there isn't a gap. So if someone, if a candidate,
because people will have gaps, won't they? The people who are out of work at the moment due to COVID, we're going to have a gap in employment. So that's really interesting that you say about different ways to fill those gaps as an explanation.
Absolutely should just say travel or whatever it is that person's been doing. It's all valid, but it just shows that the employer can see what that person has been doing with that chunk of time.
Even if that is job seeking, looking for work, trying to find
absolutely,
a job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's also important to put an end date on each job. Yeah. I think recently it's been a big thing when I'm looking at CVs. I'm not sure if the person's still employed. I'm not sure if they're still working at that company. And there's really no shame in having left a company and being unemployed at the moment. So I definitely think make sure your CV is really bang up to date and you've put an end date when you left a company, and that CV is a true reflection of where you are right now in your life.
For me, I'm a real stickler for detail with CVs. I look at so many every day. What I suppose for me, a good CV that would stand out, I've done a couple of videos on this, but it needs to not be too long and it needs to not be too short. So 2 to 3 pages max, I think, is about right. If you have so much detail on there that it's like a book, people won't read it, they switch off. No. Equally, if you condense it down to 1 page and almost you're potentially giving, I don't know, 10 years work experience in bullet points on 1 page, it's not enough detail to really excite someone. I think looking for work at the moment, you have to almost expect that actually there are a lot of people looking, but therefore the people that are doing the recruiting have a huge volume of CVs to get through. You probably will have their attention for like 20, 30 seconds. So for me, the biggest thing is making it count from the beginning. So of course you need your contact details on there. That's a given. I personally love like a profile, just a couple of sentences that explains who you are, what you've done and what you want to do. So if you have unfortunately lost your job due to COVID-19 or for any other reason, you can get that in there. It's like Charlotte, it's clear from the beginning why you've applied or what your situation is. And then for me, I think Carol mentioned it, but like dates, do it in chronological order. The amount of CVs I see that show a job that someone did when they were 16 and they're now 30, bearing in mind what I said about that 30 seconds of attention, you really want to make, I suppose, the most relevant part of your experience stand out first. So start with your most recent job and work your way backwards. And then in terms of detail, I think like striking the balance right, try not to make it vague and a bit like you've copied and pasted your job spec. That doesn't really help. You know, if you just put that you've done administrative duties, that's great, but you kind of don't need to put that on there. You want to say what those duties were. What did you do? What systems did you use? The right level of detail that would make someone basically read on. That's your aim. The first section of your CV, if it's punchy enough and tailored enough, someone should want to read on and get to the end and hopefully then reach out to you. If you don't get those basics right on the first half page of your CV, I fear that the person looking at it will switch off and then that will just be a straight up no.
We say that to candidates so often, don't we, that when you're thinking of layout, Emma has put a question in the Q&A box when we said formatting is so important. How do you get that formatting right and how do you make it good? And I think some of the things that you've just said there, Sarah, are so important about not just what you put on your CV, but where you put it on the CV. What you want an employer to see to extend that 20 seconds of interest to a minute to 2 minutes to getting in the shortlist. You need them to see it. So therefore, the most important things have to be on page 1, if anything at the top of page 1. So don't put loads of filler on page 1 to make it look and fill up the space. Get the juicy, good information, and actually quite crucially, the information that's relevant to the post you're applying for, which might be different each time you apply for a job. which leads us quite nicely actually into our second poll, if we can. I'm quite keen to know of the people on the webinar. Just give it a second because I think it can take a minute to pop up onto the screens. In case there's a bit of a delay. This is about tailoring your CV, so hopefully you can all see that now. I'm keen to know of those of you in the audience, do you just have one CV that you apply for every job regardless, and it's a cut and paste job and every application gets the same CV, or do you actively spend time tailoring your CV when you're applying for a job? So if you can choose, again, don't overthink it, just which one of those most applies to you. Is that something you never do? Is it something you always do? Or is it somewhere in the middle that you've done it sometimes but not consistently? If you can tick your answer to whichever one of those is the most appropriate to you. I think it'll be interesting to see from those amongst you what our most popular answer is. So the results should be coming up. Okay, so fairly even split. Majority have said sometimes, some very amongst you have said never. And I'm pleased to see we've got 12% who do that all the time. I can't advocate that enough. I think we're probably all in agreement on that one. It doesn't have to, I think sometimes people get put off by doing that because they think it will take forever. It doesn't have to take a long time. Any tips from the panel on how people can manage that to make sure their CV is tailored without it really slowing down the process? Anyone got any advice there?
You can have, I always use HR as an example because it's what I know best, but you can have different starting points for the CV. So within HR, I do recruitment, I do learning and development, I do performance management, I do lots of different things. So you could have you could have a bank of 4 or 5 different CVs as your starting point to then tailor for the specific job, because like an admin role, I don't know, it might have like international or not international, and you might have done a bit of international but not all the time, so you could have maybe an international spin on your CV and then a non-international CV, so you could have a different starting point for each time you apply for a role. I think people, if I'm honest, tailor their CVs when it's one they really, really want and when they really think it's a good match, because then it feels like it's a good use of their time.
Yeah. And I think can definitely use the job description as a guide, because the company will, the things that are really important to that job, they'll put at the top of the job description. So it's a little bit like looking at the ingredients on the side of a cereal packet. I always say the main ingredients and what you really are going to get out of that, whatever you're eating, is going to be right there at the top of the list. So I think definitely look at the job description. You'll know what the company really wants and what they are going to be looking for and what they find important for that role. So, and if you've done it, I'm not saying if you haven't done it, don't put it on your CV, but if you have, absolutely highlight it. Please do make sure that it's one of the first kind of bullet points that we're reading, because you've got that experience, you want to highlight it, you want to let everybody know about it for this particular role. And sometimes you might think, gosh, I've read that job description again, and actually I've only got 1 or 2 things that they need. Then you should think, maybe that's not the job for me. So this is a really good exercise when you're applying for a job. If you can't highlight on your CV that you've got some really meaty experience for that role, think again, and maybe it's not the right job for you. But if you have, please highlight it and make sure that it's right there at the top of your explanations of each of your roles.
Yeah, great.
One of the key bits of advice I'd give to anyone today, if you take one thing away, is either tailor your CV for a job or don't apply. Because personally, if you're applying for lots of jobs and you're getting lots of rejection, that's not good. That's not good mentally, and it doesn't really help you in terms of your confidence when you do get interviews and all that kind of stuff. So either apply for the jobs that really matter, but if in that instance, make sure you tailor your CV, because it's so competitive out there. There are so many people looking. Whereas maybe last year you might have somebody that would give you the benefit of the doubt or read more into your CV than maybe you put down. That's not going to happen now. So I think if you want to be successful, what Charlotte said is true. Almost have different versions of your CV. So if you're hypothetically doing, I don't know, account management or customer service, you might have one that leans more towards customer service, one more for account management, maybe one for general administration. So you start off with a templated version, but you just draw your most relevant experience onto that document. So what is relevant for that type of role? And then when you're selecting the roles you apply for, like Carol said, just make sure you get it right. Silly things like if on the job description it mentions that a company use a particular system and you've used it, put it on there. Again, really categorically do not lie. If you're not an advanced user of Excel, you just know how to turn it on and put on some basic information. Don't say you're advanced, because that will really backfire. But do just sell yourself in a way that's correct, basically. Even down to silly things like some companies I know have quite specific job titles. So the job you're doing at the moment may be, I don't know, an administrative role, but your job title is something really quite ambiguous. I would recommend, even in that instance, almost using a more specific job title. So using your real job title, but in brackets, putting, I suppose, what somebody outside of your company would know that job as. Because if I look at a CV and it says, I don't know, internal support recruitment invigilator, and they're a recruitment assistant, I don't know that that's what that means. So you need to almost bridge the gap on your CV. But categorically, if you're going to do one thing, it may take you 10 minutes, but it shouldn't take you much longer if you've got the templated CVs. Just make sure you tailor them, because otherwise I just think your success rate will be a lot less.
And a couple of people have put in the chat and the Q&A, which I completely understand at the minute, that they're applying for a huge volume of jobs, understandably, particularly if you've been looking for work for a little while. But I think for me, I would, of course, you need to keep applying until you find something. But if you're thinking about the use of your time, and if you're avoiding tailoring a CV because it's time consuming, rather than perhaps look at the volume of jobs you're applying for, trim that down a little bit, and instead of applying for lots of jobs that maybe you're not right for, or wouldn't want anyway, take that time to increase your chances in being successful in the roles that you really want and that you really would be good, you'd love if you got them, because it's going to be better mentally for you, but also you're increasing your chances at the same time. So it's all round a bit of a win-win in the ways you're spending your time. Sarah, just quickly, you pointed out then about job titles, about matching terminology. That would help well with what I mean. We don't use it here, but I know a lot of businesses now more and more so are using automated methods of shortlisting and screening. Matching terminology will help with applicant tracking software.
Yes, different companies do things differently. You tend to find sometimes larger companies will use some sort of ATS, like an applicant tracking system. In its simplest form, what that means is a computer is screening your CV. So you've got to make sure that your CV really is right for a human being, but also will get past the computer check first. So what that would typically look like is normally it's keywords. So it just goes by what we said in terms of tailoring a CV. If there's a specific job, that ATS system will look for specific keywords on your CV and screen it. And if it doesn't match the criteria it's looking for, it won't get put through to the recruiter in the first place. So the main thing to be successful for that is really tailoring it, but making sure you get the keywords from the job description onto your CV. And also just be aware of file type. On most companies' websites, when they have some sort of ATS, it will say on there the acceptable file types when you're uploading your CV. If, for argument's sake, you've got it in a creative package or something like that, and it will only accept PDFs or Word documents, it literally won't get read. So you will get rejected, but not necessarily because you're wrong, but just because the software just rejects you straight out. So it's just something to be mindful of, really.
Yeah. Okay, that's great advice. Okay, thank you. A couple of people put questions in the Q&A box, which we will be picking up later through the webinar. So if I haven't addressed them yet, it's not because I'm ignoring them. I've seen them. There's some that have been posted that we are coming to in a while, so we will get to them. So CVs are obviously a huge part of applying for a job, but what else can a candidate do or not do to make sure that their application in its entirety stands out for all the right reasons? Carol, can I start with you to talk about applications?
Yeah, so some companies do ask for a cover letter, and I think that It's entirely up to you whether you include that or not. PayPoint don't ask for a cover letter, but I definitely think it's quite a good idea to have a spreadsheet when you're applying for a job. So there's nothing worse than phoning somebody and they can't remember that they've applied for a role. And I get that, you've applied for lots of roles. But for me, when I'm doing any job hunting for myself or I'm giving people advice, I absolutely have a spreadsheet going, and I will put down the name of the company, if there is a contact person, if I have their contact details, the date I sent my application in, because and if I can, have that job description saved somewhere, because most of the time, and I try and do it with candidates, is not surprise them when they're standing in the supermarket and I phone them and say, you applied for something. I'll email them. I'll absolutely try and arrange a time to speak to them about a job. And I also attach the job description again, because I know what it's like. So if that is, hopefully people will do that for you, but if they don't, absolutely go back to your spreadsheet, go through it, say, oh yes, I applied for PayPoint, it was 2 weeks ago, but I'm still grateful to get a call back, and make sure that you've done a bit of research on that company. So you've absolutely looked up the person you're going to be speaking to on LinkedIn. Check out their background. There could be something that you have in common. There could be, just something to break the ice with that person, and just have a look at their background so you know who you're speaking to. Take a look at the website to get a general feel for what the company does. Check the location. I know it may not be that important at the moment when we're all working from home mostly, but just check, because we will be going back into the office, and we are at PayPoint starting to come back in. Check it's a good location for you so you're not wasting anybody's time. Can you get there? Isn't a reasonable commute? And so when you get on that call with either myself as a recruiter or a hiring manager, you really come across as somebody who knows their stuff. You know what job you applied for. You absolutely have your own CV in front of you, and you can pick out things that you can chat about that on the call, and that you have a good understanding of what the company does as well. So I think that spreadsheet really keeps my mind focused, and it also helps me know when to follow up with somebody. So I did apply 2 weeks ago. You dropped me an email, but I haven't heard back from you yet. So I'm going to drop you another email because it's been a week, and I'm just going to follow up. So I would say that candidate that looks super organized from the beginning, and has helped themselves by giving themselves all these tools and aids to make sure that they do look organized, and doing some research. So that tailoring your CV, doing a little bit of research on the company, and making sure that it's a viable role for you from all sorts of aspects, from the hours, the location, and it might be a fixed term contract. Does that work for you right now? Would 4 months be better than nothing? Is a maternity cover good for you? It looks like an immediate start. Can I start immediately? So all of those things I think are going to help that recruiter and think, wow, this person's great, and absolutely I'm going to now submit them to the hiring manager, because that's what my job is to make it easy for the hiring manager to look at 4 candidates who are absolutely all right for their role, and then they move on to interview.
You've made some great points there, Carol. And actually, someone in the chat box has just added something brilliant that you haven't mentioned. Going back to I love this because it shows how much attention everybody's paying. But going back to what we said a moment ago, on your spreadsheet of applications, if you're following our advice and you've got multiple versions of your same CV, note which one you sent for that application. So
yeah,
you know this is the CV you've seen, not version 2 or version 7.
Yeah.
I know which one you've seen. That's a really brilliant suggestion. Thank you to Emma who posted that in there. And I couldn't agree more. And I know Sarah and I say this when we're recruiting for Lawrence Dean. If you phone somebody who's applied to work for us, and the first thing they say is, what job was that again? Immediately you feel a bit sad. And I know that for those of you looking for work at the moment, you're applying for lots of roles. For me as an individual, if somebody's applied to work for me, I really want them to want to work for me. And I know they will have applied for lots of roles, but at the very least at that point, I'd really love them. So it's like saying, yeah, I know I applied for a job with you, and now you've applied. So if you can, any mechanism you can to keep track of your applications, so that when you jump that first hurdle, when you get that first phone call, you don't kind of damage the reputation at the start. And as someone else said in the chat, use the opportunity to build the rapport from the get-go, is well worth it. Thank you for those tips, Carol. That's great. I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I'm conscious of time because I don't want us to run over for all of those of you that have joined the call. With regard to applications, though, one question from me for the panel. You mentioned about following up there. How do you all feel about people chasing you? So if somebody's applied for a job with you, how soon is too soon to chase? How much is too much chasing? Not enough? What do we think about that?
I would say a week. I think at the moment, and because I'm dependent on, you know, the hiring manager coming back to me, but I absolutely would follow up, and I would give it a week. Let me know if anything's changed in your situation. Let me know that you're still keen. And yeah, I would absolutely give it about a week. Drop me an email, because I'm personally better on email than I am you phoning me and I'm sort of doing something else. So yeah, drop me an email and just politely say, applied for that job, still very keen. Is there any movement on it? And I will absolutely, try and come back to you and give you a bit of an update and let you know where we are with the recruitment of that role.
I would agree. I think for me, it stands out. Yeah, no, if you think about it, like, I'll be honest, at the moment, we, as a business, we're recruiting for less roles, and we have obviously a lot more people that are interested. So to actually kind of physically get through that volume is really, really hard. So people that really stand out to me are those that will take the time and email you personally and say, whether it's asking for an update on the application or just pointing out they've applied and is there any news, or, that does, if you're talking about standing out, that really does stand out, because not everyone does that. I think, like Carol said, if you do it too soon, you could borderline it could be a little bit irritating. But certainly after a week, just to kind of send a polite email, it's just another way of making you more visible, really. So I would recommend that.
And thanking for that feedback. I think, Carol, you might have mentioned this in a previous discussion that we've had, but if somebody applies for a role and are unsuccessful, but handles that beautifully, asks for feedback, thanks you for the feedback, the next time you get an application from that person, you just might remember, and it just might, although they didn't get that one, it just might help with future applications. So every opportunity to engage with a potential employer is important. It's important not to burn bridges. It's important to stay polite and respectful and keen and interested, because it's all networking, isn't it? And building.
Yeah. We get roles coming in all the time, and if you've interviewed for one role, and as I said, there's so many great candidates out there, you could all do the job and you were all great, but we only had one role. So, but the next time we have a role that comes up, and that hiring manager will chat to the next hiring manager and say, I had 3 great candidates, you've got a role coming up that's similar, why don't you chat to these people? So you never know what's around the corner. So absolutely, hopefully there's another opportunity waiting, and we can offer you the next role that comes up.
So that leads us in beautifully, Carol, thank you, to our next poll. So on the subject of building networks and building connections and getting recognised and building rapport with people for all the right reasons, I'd like us to talk about LinkedIn a little bit. So if we can get poll 3 up on the screen. For all of you looking for roles at the moment, we'd like to know, do you actively use LinkedIn? So when you're applying for a role, you've seen the name of the hiring manager or the recruiter who's looking for that position. Do you actively go onto LinkedIn, connect with that person, engage with them in any sort of way when you're applying for a job? You're used to this now, so I don't even need to say it, but same as before, whichever one of those answers is most appropriate. Straightforward, always, never, or some of the time. Give you a minute to all respond, and then we'll see what that looks like in terms of the answers. Results should be popping up now. Okay, so that's really interesting. That's something that we'd like to talk about more. So more than half of you are not connecting in any way on LinkedIn with people when you're applying for a job. So we can talk about that now at length. So I'm going to come to you first, Charlotte, if that's okay, because I like Sarah and I, you're particularly keen on this LinkedIn stuff. So how can job seekers use LinkedIn to their advantage in this current climate?
Well, I'm surprised by the results, actually, because do you actively to connect with the employer? So if someone looked at my profile as a recruiter for an organisation, I would think that was totally normal and acceptable. And if you're interested in the company, you can get a lot of news and a lot of background, their recent developments, what they're actively working on on LinkedIn. So if you don't do that, that's a missed trick. You get a lot of visuals, you know, before you've walked into the company, or you've seen a job online or at an agency. If you don't look at who they're employing, what they do, what their ethos, their mission, how they do business, their responsibility, commitments, it's a missed trick if you don't do that. And it's all there, just sitting there. And sometimes it's a really interesting read, and sometimes if you think, oh gosh, that isn't an interesting read, then don't waste your or their time with the application. And it gives you a real insight into how the organisation ticks. And I think just getting a scale of it as well on LinkedIn is quite interesting. You've applied for a role, but how many people do they employ? Is it 30, 300, 3,000, 30,000? Where are they based? You can get so much information. A
couple of people have commented to say that they'd be hesitant to do that because it looks a bit too forthright. So they might check out the company page on LinkedIn, but they'd be
follow the company.
But just a connection request.
You can see my profile. If you're applying to that team, like Carol says, you know, I'm the HR resourcer, but you're going to work for a function. If you didn't look me up, I'm a representative of that. What skills or that the company might be interested in. So, you know, oh, they look like a like-minded person. I'm not saying like stereotype and everyone needs to be the same, don't get me wrong, but like companies do have a culture.
But if somebody did send you a connection request before, would that offend you in any way, or would you think that that was proactive?
They might not necessarily need to even connect with me. They might just sort of stalk me a bit on LinkedIn and just see like where have I worked before, that I'm a local person to Hertfordshire, or, you know, stuff like that. I would just be nosy and have a look around and see who else works in that organisation. You might know someone, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what LinkedIn's all about. It's about connections. Yeah. And I don't think people should view confuse Facebook and LinkedIn. I think getting a LinkedIn request to link in with somebody, it's absolutely positive. It's what we do. It's what business people are all about. So I don't think it's a bad thing to want to link in with somebody. And even if you weren't successful, as we said, something else might come up with that company. Follow them. I think probably in Hertfordshire, it's all about people wanting to work locally half the time, and being quite keen to connect with people and maybe follow their careers. So, and I think that's a brilliant way to do it on LinkedIn. And also another thing is follow companies and follow interesting groups and comment so that your face and your name comes up on that feed, so that I'll be like, oh, we did interview that guy. Oh, look, he's moved on. Look, he's doing so well, and look, she's just joined a new company, and that's really interesting. So be active on LinkedIn as well. Make sure that you do pop up from time to time and people remember you and like your post. And I mean, you share great things. Lawrence Dean are great on LinkedIn. You know, I think it's just giving it that human feel, because I think we're all very businesslike, but we're all, you know, bumbling through together. We're all having good and bad days. And I think it's just great to be able to share some of that as well. And linking in with people, I personally think it's the right thing to do. And you've got to do your research on LinkedIn. When I send an interview link, I'll send that link to who you're going to be meeting. I'll put their LinkedIn, the link to their page, just in case you don't naturally think about it. It couldn't be any easier. You need to click on this person before you speak to them, and just check out their profile. It's just, you wouldn't want to go in somewhere blind. You know, go in with as much information as possible so that you go in feeling super confident because you've got all that information and you've done your research.
I mean, we could do a whole webinar in itself about LinkedIn and ways that you can help yourself in LinkedIn. But as well as connecting with people you're applying to, your own profile is not just your profile first of all, but your activity on LinkedIn can help you leaps and bounds in your job search. I would advocate it to anyone. Really spend some time every day, as well as just applying for roles, spend some time every day on LinkedIn. So all the stuff Carol said, following the company you might want to work for, connecting, but most importantly, engage with people. And if anyone wants to pick up with Sarah or I afterwards about this in a bit more detail, more than happy to. We've been really embracing LinkedIn through this lockdown period, and actually it's a much warmer place to be than it used to be. Like Carol said, it's a bit more personality going on in there. It's very professional still, but people want to get to know you, and the more they see you, notice you, like your content. LinkedIn has algorithms. I don't want to bore you forever about this, but if you engage with people, LinkedIn thinks you're friends. So if Carol posts on LinkedIn and you always comment on Carol's post and she always replies and says thanks, LinkedIn thinks you're friends. So next time you post something, Carol will see it. And therefore, next time you apply for PayPoint, Carol will think, oh, that's the person that I spoke to on LinkedIn the other day. So that's a really simplified kind of version of it, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. LinkedIn needs to think your friends. So engage, comment, share things, post things, get yourself noticed on LinkedIn for all the right reasons. It certainly can't do you any harm at all.
No.
It's your online CV. It's your online CV. So if you don't use it,
yeah, you're missing
that's
a trick.
bad.
All I was going to add was just going back to basics. If you're going to do all of that, that's great, but make sure your profile is as you want it to be. So like Charlotte said, it's your CV. So yes, make sure it's up to date. It's got the right information on there. If you're looking for a role, put what you're looking for on there. And then through building connections, like I know loads of people that have had success finding jobs from LinkedIn, not from applying, not jobs I've actually seen and applied for, but you've seen a lot of stuff of people that are saying that they're open to work for this reason, explaining their situation, saying what they're doing. And because at the moment, like we said before, there's absolutely no shame in not having a job. It's a horrible situation. Lots of people have found themselves in, and it's nobody's fault. But what you're finding is, as part of a community, other connections are sharing that. You know, I saw one guy and I shared it. I've never met him. I don't know who he is, but he had something like, I don't know, 3,000 shares, just because people empathise, they understand. And I think he actually got something from people sharing his kind of request for a job through their contacts and contacts and contacts. And that's how it builds. So I would recommend that. I'd also just raise one point with the people that mentioned, like, is it too much? Is it, you know, a bit much to do that? I think the first thing is, like, today is all about how to stand out, how to be different. You would definitely stand out by doing that, because not a lot of people do connect with people. So one, you would stand out for all the right reasons. If you feel a little bit awkward about it, just bear in mind on the, forgive me, I think it's the app version of LinkedIn. It's got doesn't have all the capability. So when you add a connection, or if you do it on a desktop version, you have the option to actually put a personalized message. So whereas if you do it on your phone, you don't. So if you do feel a little bit feel a bit awkward connecting with that person, maybe use that version. So you could just put, you know, I've applied for a role, I wanted to connect, whatever makes you feel happier that it's a good representation of you.
If I was seeing a candidate, I would look them up on LinkedIn, so I don't see why they wouldn't be able to look me up on LinkedIn. It's not one-way traffic. Employment is a mutually beneficial arrangement, you know. It's not just one-sided.
Yeah. And like Carol said, it's a network, and it's not Facebook. It's a professional network. Obviously be careful of the content that you post and the sort of thing that you do because of that, but it is a professional network, and you can find out so much information you would never find out on a company's website. So again, if you get successful for interviews, it is such a good tool. So if anyone does want any help, we'd be happy to do a separate thing about that.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left. There's another section that I want to talk about, but just a reminder to anyone watching, if it is now getting to the point where you had a burning question that we haven't covered, do pop it in the Q&A box. If you can put it in the Q&A box rather than the chat box, then I'm less likely to miss it. So any other questions, there's a few in there that we'll cover in a second, but any other questions, you've got a few more minutes to post your Q&A. Before we move on to that, one question that has popped in as we've gone through is a really valid question, actually, that I think loads of people must be feeling right now. If you're just starting out your career, and we're talking on CVs about making your experience stand out and putting your experience first, COVID has prevented people from being able to gain experience. So either for people who've done all the things we've talked about and are still not getting anywhere, or people who don't have the experience to put on their CV, what else can people be doing to help themselves? Can I start with you, Sarah? Is there some stuff that you could advise on?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things. So if for argument's sake, I'll use a stereotype here, if you've just finished university and you haven't had a sort of your first proper job yet, if you've had part-time work, make sure you really go into lots of detail around actually what value that's added. Also things like outside of work activities, if you've done like volunteering or been traveling or anything that would just give you different skills, really, it gives you a better chance to sell yourself. In terms of, I suppose, other options, we're a recruitment company. We help a lot of people find temporary work. So that can be a great way of just getting some skills and experience on your CV. So it may be something more junior to what you would want potentially permanently, but it helps you have something. I suppose my advice would be, I think it's better to do something than nothing. So Carol touched on it earlier. There is absolutely no shame at the moment. I've seen people that are CEOs of companies working in Asda. You know, before this, that wouldn't have really happened. People have got to survive. They've got bills to pay. You know, it's really unprecedented times and people are doing all sorts of things. So if there's an option to do something, whether that's something, you know, as basic as that or whatever it might be, it's better to do something. So volunteering, temporary work potentially, maybe just, you know, a job in Costa. Or if there's a job, there's a job. It's a lot easier to find a job, I think, when you're in a job. You feel more confident. You have less time to kind of focus on it and worry about it. So you probably perform better when you do get interviews. So my advice would be, as I said, there's no shame. Something is better than nothing. Not saying it's going to be your forever, but something like Carol mentioned before. So the 4-month contract that gets you through and gets you some experience is totally justifiable why you would choose to do that at the moment. And no one would judge you, I feel.
And we spoke about people just making connections. Who knows when you go into that 4-month contract, talk to people about what you'd really like to be doing, and who knows what might come up during that time. And also you've made a great impression in those 4 months and that company might phone you back again. So yeah, crazy things have happened when, you know, people have taken something and it's actually just been, you know, by chance that it's changed and they've, you know, it's given them opportunities to meet different people and learn new skills. So absolutely volunteering and contracts and temp work, I think is the way to go.
I think a lot of it, the outcome depends on the attitude that you go into those kind of jobs with, if you'd agree. So absolutely, there is no shame in anyone's circumstances at the moment. Let's face it, wherever your position is now, the last 6 months have been interesting in so many ways. But whether it's taking a more junior role than you normally would like, working in retail when normally you'd be in, I don't know, finance, whatever it might be, it's good to be doing something. But I think it's about the attitude that you go into that with. And it's really important to be humble, but also to be respectful and empathetic. Something that's not your dream job might be someone else's everyday normal. So as much as it's okay to say, look, I'm doing this, and in my real life, I actually would like to be doing this, rather, you know, but cautiously, so that you're not going to come across as feeling like you're, you know, actually I'm a bit better than this in my real life. But yeah, but if you can go into any role, any company, any team, regardless of what that team's purpose is, it's connecting, it's networking. You never know who works where, whose mum is an HR manager of a different company. So anywhere you're working can open for you. So it's really important and a great shout to do that. And we've got lots of examples of where people have started in a temporary role with a company, only ever intended to be there for a few weeks, did a great job, company asked them to stay a bit longer, did another great job, stayed a bit longer still, and ultimately ended up in what turned out to be their dream job. So you just never know. I promise that's the only sales thing I do.
I think at the moment, so I'll be honest about things. So I'm also conscious, you know, sometimes people can't get those kind of jobs right now, or maybe, you know, volunteering isn't an option. But anything you've done that's additional, especially if you've got no experience, try and do something. So I don't know, if you've done lots of online courses during lockdown, or actually, do you know what, maybe you haven't. You've had to care for a relative, or, you know, you've got elderly neighbours and you've helped them out. I think people are a lot more understanding of that now. Everyone's kind of experiences to this whole situation have been very different. But it's okay to put stuff like that on your CV. You know, if you haven't been working, but you have been helping relatives or doing a bit of volunteering or learning, or, you know, homeschooling. I mean, some people have just trying to survive, let's be honest. So yeah, whatever it is that you've done, that's okay. That shows strengths in itself and sort of transferable skills, whether you realise it or not.
Yeah, agreed.
Totally right. That's a really lovely point to leave that there. Thank you, all of you. I've got a couple of questions from people that have come through. So I'm going to go for the first one, which is a quick fire one. Let me just see if I can see who asked this one. I think it was Emma, but forgive me if I've got that wrong because it scrolled up off of my screen. It was a bit earlier on when we were talking about CV. So CVs naturally are subjective, and that's one of the challenges with applying for a job. We've talked about it in one of my team talked about it in a LinkedIn post last week. What someone loves on a CV, someone else will dislike, so that you're always battling a little bit with that subjectivity. But for the three of you in the room, quick fire around the room, what's your one pet hate on a CV? Is there something you really dislike or that would put you off? I'm going to be controversial. I'll go first. Mine is a photo. Now, I know for some roles that's great. I find it really difficult when I see a photo on a CV. I think it takes me by surprise when I open it, and then I'm almost on the back foot. For lots of roles, people love that. But for me, I find a photo, I don't know. I don't really want to base my decisions on what somebody looks like. It takes me by surprise. So
I agree. I think it's a culture thing. I think there's definitely there's a format of a CV that we get through, and it's definitely generally, I don't know,
one of these templates.
Spanish. Yeah, I think some countries, they absolutely advise that you pop a picture on there. So it might be that that's the case, and it's just really, as I say, giving them a bit of advice that we don't want to be biased in any shape or form, and we absolutely don't mind who comes and does this job. So I agree. I think I would take that photo off and give people advice not to put their photo or their date of birth or their marital status or any of those things on their CV. It's absolutely irrelevant for our role.
Yeah.
For me, it would be gaps. I hate gaps on a CV, and I hate it being not accurate. So if you've left a job, that's fine, but don't have
the accuracy one that bothers you more than a gap, I think.
Yeah. If I'm phoning someone, and also what would happen with that is sometimes you wouldn't get a call. So if we're recruiting for a contract role and on your CV it looks like you're still in a job because you haven't put an end date, I wouldn't think to call you about that, because I would presume you would be on notice and not available, and so you're selling yourself short. So for me, gaps, and I suppose leading on from that, if somebody's had a lot of jobs but there's no explanation as to why. Lots of people do have lots of jobs for various reasons. They could be temporary contracts or relocation, but just some sort of explanation so that you look at it and you understand that journey that person's been on. But yeah, gaps.
Yeah, because people will have had fixed term contracts and temp work. So pop that after the dates that it was a maternity cover, and that it was a 6-month contract, and that was my reason for leaving. I only stayed that long. And the next one might have been a temp role, put their reason for leaving, company liquidated, temporal, fixed term contract. It really does help us before we pick up that phone to build a picture of, that's great. I can see that you're really diverse, and you can, you're absolutely agile, and you can jump into a company, I really just need to understand and get that picture just from looking at that CV and having a brief look. So I agree, make it as complete as possible, and give us all that information.
Right. Anything different from you, Charlotte, or are you in agreement with the rest?
I hate gaps and I hate photos, but I also hate I was just thinking, I hate a one-pager. I'll take a one-pager if it's a school leaver or something like that, but I wouldn't really want to read a 5-pager either. So the length of the CV would be important, and I'm not a fan of all the quirky design and making it look pretty. I just want a Word document with words on. I don't want any borders really or anything.
Colours.
No. Yeah, I don't need it to be a work of art. I just need it to have text
with the same font throughout.
Yes.
If you're applying for design creative roles, of course that's different. But for
I think it is different in that sector, but that's
not
what I'm used to seeing.
Okay, thank you.
Font is really important as well.
Sorry, say that again.
Same font. Quite often you see a CV where it's quite obvious that someone has just literally added a load of text in their job and chucked it on a CV they've had for 10 years, and it really shows, but it also is quite sloppy, doesn't show. It's not a great first impression. It needs to be in the same font.
Spelling mistakes are a big no-no as well. Now you've got me started. If it says I for detail and then there's loads of spelling mistakes, it shows me that person hasn't got I for detail. And it's a non-starter.
And make sure you know where to put a capital letter. I think for Welwyn Garden City, capital W, G. who see, and that's a big one. So
Yeah.
it's saying you've got great attention to detail, but then you make lots of silly mistakes. So absolutely get somebody to have a look at your CV and read it, and maybe print it off so you know what it looks like printed, so you get that formatting correct. So definitely ask somebody that you really would, you trust their opinion, and you know that they can spell, to have a quick look over your CV.
It's difficult to proofread your own work, isn't it? I think we're all...
You just know it so well, and you've seen it too many times.
Yeah. Okay. We are rapidly running out of time, but I've got time for just one more quick question, if I can. Let me just see if I can see on my screen who has asked this. Yes, when we talked about applying for potentially perhaps lower level roles than you would typically do, if you're continually coming up against the rejection of you're overqualified or you're too experienced, any tips for it was Kat that asked that, any tips for anyone that's facing that same issue?
That is happening because people are worried that they won't stay. So that's why the employer is saying that. They want someone in the role at the right level for the duration of time that they need the role filled for. So that's why the employer is saying that. I'm not sure how to overcome it, but that's the thinking.
Would be to rather apply for a fixed term contract or temp work, because I definitely think they're going to be more receptive to taking you on more experience for a short period of time, until the world comes right again and you can apply for those jobs that you are more experienced for and suited to. Because it's only natural that you would take something that is maybe a lower level job for less money until you get yourself back on your feet, and those people respond to you, that are for the jobs you really want to do. So my advice would be to do possibly temp work or a fixed term contract. I think they're going to be more receptive to talking to you.
My only other, I suppose, different bit of advice would be if that is the situation, and that's completely right. If it is that there is a reason why you want to kind of go backwards a bit, so maybe you are overqualified but you want to take a step back, I don't know, you're looking for
personal reasons,
or whatever reason it is that actually you're making, it's not because you're trying to fill a gap and you need a job, you actually do want to make that step, then you need to make that really clear in your CV. So almost in your profile section that I talked about before, make sure you outline what you've done, why you've done it, and actually you want to do this now and these are the reasons why. Otherwise, that's the only thing I can think that would probably help with that, potentially overcome it. It may not, but it would probably stand you in good stead.
Great. Okay, and then just one last question, and if we could try and keep it quite brief, but I don't want to miss anybody out. I'm going to merge two questions that I've received from Jane and Steve and try and put them into one question, kind of. How long should someone go back on a CV? And would you say that that's different depending on the level of role that they're applying for?
I would expect someone just to start their education. I might not need to know GCSEs if they've got A-levels, and I might not need A-levels if they've obviously got a degree, but I would start off with a degree as such if someone had it, or any form of qualification, and I would start, like Sarah said earlier, at the back of the CV, the earliest job in a career, and that would have the least amount of text. But from my CV starts from I don't know, A-levels, I think, or a degree. And what my first job was for 6 years at Boston Scientific at an entry-level HR role. And 15 years ago, that was big on my CV, and now it's one line, and it says this is an entry-level HR role for 6 years, because I've got all the other roles to put on top. But it still starts from
there.
The beginning.
The perfect way to sum it up, isn't it? The more relevant things typically are going to be the more recent stuff, unless they're not. If you're applying for something that relates to something you did years ago, then clearly make that bigger again. And this perhaps goes back to that question of tailoring your CV. Generally, again, it also relates a little bit, I suppose, to how old you are, because naturally that's how much experience you're going to have to put on your CV. If you've only been working for a couple of years, then you're likely going to want every piece of work experience you've got on there. Whereas if you've been working for 20 years, the things you did 19 years ago are likely to be less relevant, so therefore should take up less space.
I agree. But if you're new to the job market, to the employment market, and you've just left college, just put everything down. Just put everything down that you do, if it's sport or and it's teamwork, or if it's learning an instrument and it shows discipline, or if you're volunteered, or if you've done anything, just put it on there if you're at that stage. And then if I put down that I had something from a long time ago, then it's not relevant, because I've got 20 years to talk about, unfortunately.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. Thank you all for watching and participating. Thank you for the loads of lovely questions and the poll responses. Thank you to the panelists. There is so much that we could talk about on this subject, but hopefully you've all gained some really good practical tips there, and at least something that each of you can put into practice. As we talked about, please do feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn if you'd like to. We won't be offended or think you're too forward at all. I promise we'll accept the connection requests, so send them through. If any of you would like to pick up with any of us afterwards, you're very welcome to. I know Charlotte has mentioned she does some CV coaching, and we'll be happy to have a quick call with people for a few minutes just to give some sort of basic feedback and observations on your CV. So that's available as well for you. Personally, for me, this is the first candidate webinar we've done of this type, so I'd be really grateful for any feedback. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message on there, or email me here if you've got my email address. You know where to find me. But I really would be grateful for any feedback either on this webinar or anything that you would like us to cover in future sessions. So please feel free to do that. And aside from that, just to say we wish you all the very, very best of luck with your job search. Let us know how you get on, and have a good week and a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.